America's defense chief reacts to news of a potential nuclear threat. That's after Beijing reportedly tested a new weapon that can help it avoid the U.S. missile defense system. A Chinese fugitive dies as police close in. Despite allegedly killing two neighbors, his desperate story has won public sympathy, and his death triggered an outrage on social media. Part of hit series Squid Game may be coming true in China. The blood-soaked organ harvesting scene in the fictitious Netflix success is happening in real life, with mainly Uyghurs and Falun Gong practitioners cast as the victims. No Genocide Games. That's what protesters chanted as they broke into the torchlighting ceremony in Athens, ahead of Beijing's 2022 Winter Olympics. And a German politician sounds an alert. He said Beijing was using a term the Nazis had used for Jewish people, but adds that this time Taiwan is the target. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. China news may seem chaotic. With so much information swirling in the news, we want to offer you a look at the bigger picture to help you make sense of the details. If you haven't already, use the link in the description box and subscribe to our China in Focus newsletter. On top of offering the highlights of what's going on, it also gives the much-needed context behind those stories. And once in a while, you'll also get a peek into some behind-the-scenes content to see what we're up to. Every Friday morning, the latest will land in your inbox. America's defense chief is reacting to China's latest nuclear ambitions. This after news of Beijing reportedly testing a weapon that could pose a great nuclear threat to the U.S.
Thanks for asking the question, but I'm not going to comment on those specific reports. What I can tell you is that we watch closely China's development of armament and advanced capabilities and systems that will only increase tensions in the region. You've heard me say a number of times that China is my pacing challenge, and we're going to remain focused on that.
Beijing denies the test. It says it tested a space vehicle, not a nuclear-capable hypersonic missile. But what would make the testing of such a weapon so unnerving if it did happen? Experts say if China can combine this weapon with a specific type of nuclear weapon delivery system, America's defense system would have difficulty detecting a nuclear attack from China. The Financial Times says Beijing tested a nuclear-capable hypersonic weapon in August, and this weapon is lethal in the sense that it's hard to track. But why does it pose a greater threat to the U.S.? It would give Beijing more methods for launching a nuclear attack. A defense expert told NTD that if China were to strike the U.S. with a ballistic missile, it would typically fly over the North Pole, and it would be easy for the U.S. to detect such an attack. Whereas if China used a hypersonic weapon combined with a delivery system called FOBs, then it would fly over the South Pole before reaching the U.S. And in that scenario, they would still be detected, but it would complicate U.S. responses. An update on the family massacre case in China. A murder suspect who garnered widespread sympathy from the Chinese public has died. The news is triggering a stream of grief and outrage on social media.
A villager in China's southern Fujian province, wanted by police, is now dead. The government has offered a controversial reward for his whereabouts or proof of his death. On Monday, local police said he killed himself while resisting arrest and added he was sent to a hospital and died despite emergency rescue efforts. Accused of killing two neighbors and injuring three others, Oh Jin-dong has been on the run for more than a week. During that time, hundreds of police officers were looking for Oh in the hills of his village from where he fled. Police eventually found him in a cave, but the public hoped he wouldn't be found, with some Weibo users, China's Twitter-like platform, saying things like, "Uncle, run away. Hope you can still find happiness for the remainder of your life." Many believed Oh was an ordinary man pushed to the brink of despair over a years-long housing dispute. Public sympathy surged further after reports emerged that he had saved a young boy from drowning at sea 30 years ago. The then young boy, now a grown man, expressed his support for Oh in a self-recorded video online.
发生真的很让人痛心，我个人真的也很难过，因为他是一个很善良、很老实的人，在我的印象中，确实是一个很有正义感的人。
Many blame the government for Oh's transition from savior to now a murder suspect. For nearly 5 years, Oh and his family, including his nearly 90-year-old mother, did not have a home. Instead, they lived in a small tin shack in a seaside village. According to reports, Oh was repeatedly prevented from building his own house due to land disputes with his neighbor. He said he sought help from police, village officials, the government, and the media. But the problem remained unresolved. And on Monday evening, some in China said they were not convinced that Oh took his own life. They called for the police to release videos of the arrest. Police in China are often required to record arrests. A comment said, "He killed himself immediately after he was found," and "How can people who have been hungry for 8 days have the strength to resist arrest and commit suicide?" A villager from a nearby village tells us local police strictly sealed the news. The specific situation surrounding Oh's suicide is unknown. After the police report came out, Oh's family asked for a medical examination of his body, but were refused.
Demolition by force is a common practice in China. Local governments often implement demolition first, relocation later policies. In an online video, the practice appears even more extreme. An excavator started tearing down a building before residents had evacuated. In China, when a person or company purchases property, they become the owner of the building, but the land still belongs to the regime. In addition, the regime sets a time limit for land usage rights, normally around 70 years for residential land. The clock starts ticking immediately after the land is bought. When the time comes, they'll be forced to pay fees to renew their rights to the land if the authorities give the green light. But if the regime refuses to grant another term or if it wants the land back, it simply sends workers to tear down any residential housing there. Homeowners are usually given little to no compensation and are left homeless. The South Korean horror series Squid Game is going viral on Netflix. And while the bloody story is clearly fictitious, one of its side plots is uncomfortably close to reality. That's where human beings have their organs harvested and sold. Human rights groups say China's Communist Party robs 100,000 political prisoners of their organs every year through a massive-scale government-run kill-to-order network. That's according to a British Daily Mail report. Just a week before the Netflix drama was released, Beijing claimed there is no such state-sponsored organ harvesting program. That's after the United Nations said China is targeting specific ethnic, linguistic, or religious minorities held in detention and raking in $1 billion a year. 9 UN special rapporteurs from the Human Rights Council spent over a year on witness testimony and examining China's highly suspicious organ donor rates. They said they were extremely alarmed by reports of alleged organ harvesting in detention in China. Crimes targeting minorities, including Falun Gong practitioners of spiritual discipline, Uyghurs, Tibetans, Muslims, and Christians. Their research from credible sources sheds new light on the terrifying kill-to-order system. Undercover phone calls made to Chinese hospitals show how fast patients can get surgery using the system. The calls were part of the China Tribunal hearing in 2019. The tribunal is an independent body that investigated forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience in China. In a phone conversation, a military hospital doctor tells the investigator about the abundance of organs which arrive every month. The China Tribunal found the Uyghurs and Falun Gong practitioners are essentially used as an organ bank for buyers. A Japanese official pledged to expand the country's air defense, saying China's rapid nuclear weapon developments are raising concerns.
Japan said Monday that it hopes to enhance its air defense capability. That's after reports that China tested hypersonic missiles in August. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Hirokazu Matsuno told reporters in Tokyo that Japan was alarmed.
We know that there have been reports. China appears to be rapidly developing hypersonic nuclear weapons to gain the striking power to break through missile defenses.
He said Beijing's moves had raised strong concerns over regional security and pledged to expand Japanese missile defense systems. Japan is one of the U.S.'s most important allies in the region, and in Asia, it has the most advanced technology.
A German politician accused the Chinese Communist Party of using Nazi language to threaten Taiwan. China's state-run mouthpiece, the Global Times, posted a tweet last week threatening people in Taiwan. They used a term Hitler had used during the genocide of Jews in Germany, saying the final solution of the Taiwan question. In Nazi Germany, the term final solution was associated with annihilating the Jewish people. Nazis also used the term the Jewish question in their genocide rhetoric. As a result, the term final solution of Taiwan question aroused concerns in Germany. A lawmaker told newspaper Die Welt am Sonntag over the weekend that this term has a clear reference to Nazi language. He said Beijing's ongoing threats against Taiwan have reached a new level, adding that if a Chinese propaganda medium operates in Germany with historically charged terms, then all alarm bells should ring for us against the background of our history. Voices are mounting against the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. That's in light of the Chinese Communist regime's known human rights abuses. 2 activists have now been arrested in Greece for staging a protest against holding the Games in China.
International groups are calling for the release of 2 human rights activists in Athens. They were detained by Greek police Sunday. That's for climbing onto scaffolding near the gateway of the Acropolis and holding a banner protesting the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. One of the 2 women is from Tibet, the other Hong Kong. Both are members of the group No Beijing 2022. Campaign is calling on the International Olympic Committee, or IOC, to rescind its decision to host the Winter Games in Beijing, citing human rights violations by the Chinese Communist regime.
We're calling on a full boycott of the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics due to China's genocide against the Uyghur people and the unprecedented levels of repression inside Tibet, Hong Kong, Southern Mongolia, and independent and democratic Taiwan.
The protest came one day before the Olympic flame was lit in Greece for the upcoming event. The IOC has been facing louder and louder criticism from human rights groups over the issue.
People might agree, people might disagree on a number of things. The Olympics is about trying to unite everybody, so I don't think I should comment on the protest.
Earlier, President Joe Biden attended a rededication at the University of Connecticut's Human Rights Center. There, he condemned abuses against the Uyghur ethnic minority in China, the Rohingya in Burma, and the use of starvation and sexual violence in northern Ethiopia.
Wherever we see our fellow human beings being dehumanized, doesn't mean we go to war, but we must speak out. Silence, as my dad would remind me, silence is complicity.
Biden has also announced the U.S. is rejoining the United Nations Human Rights Council, reversing former President Donald Trump's withdrawal 3 years ago.
Malaysia and Indonesia are voicing strong reservations over Australia's plans to acquire nuclear-powered submarines from the U.S. The purchase is said to counter Beijing's influence in the South China Sea.
Australia decided to acquire nuclear-powered submarines, even though nuclear weapons were not included in the AUKUS deal. AUKUS is a trilateral security pact between Australia, the U.S., and Britain, signed in September. It's seen as an effort to counter China. But the decision has Malaysia and Indonesia alarmed. Both worry the purchase could lead to an arms race in the region and jeopardize the safe mobility of business parties.
And specifically for the South China Sea, we also discussed between the 2 countries, both on the Indonesian and Malaysian sides, regarding the unique economic interests of both countries, and we agreed to always exchange information about what we will do and the challenges we face.
The deal comes amid growing tensions in the South China Sea, the channel used by 1/3 of global trade. Under AUKUS, Australia is planning to acquire at least 8 submarines, but may wait until the late 2030s to launch the first of them.
China's economic slowdown may be here to stay. That's as the country suffers from a power shortage, a property crisis, and the regime's ongoing crackdown on various industries, leading to global ramifications.
China's economy has hit its slowest pace of growth in a year, pummeled by power shortages, supply chain bottlenecks, and a property market slowdown in the 3rd quarter. Data released on Monday showed GDP grew just 4.9% in the 3rd quarter, missing analyst forecasts. It's putting pressure on policymakers to prop up the world's 2nd largest economy. China's economy staged an impressive rebound from last year's health crisis-induced slump thanks to effective containment and overseas demand for its manufactured goods. But its rapid recovery has since lost steam. Global worries about a possible spillover of credit risk from China's property sector into the wider economy have intensified as major developer China Evergrande wrestles with more than $300 billion of debt. Analysts and policy sources say Chinese leaders are likely to maintain tough curbs on the sector even as the economy slows, out of fear that a persistent property bubble could undermine the country's long-term ascent. Meanwhile, industrial output has slowed to a crawl thanks to power rationing triggered by coal shortages, environmental curbs on heavy polluters like steel plants, and massive floods over the summer.
It's been said beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but it seems not the case if you're in China. A former journalist was recently detained by Chinese police. His crime? Saying he didn't like a new film.
Civilians say a word and they get caught. This terror has reached the most absurd point in history.
The film is state-sponsored, which glorifies Chinese soldiers fighting against Americans during the Korean War. In a social media post, a journalist questioned China's role in the war. At the time when China intervened, North Korean troops were close to defeat. In China, under the Communist Party, it is a crime to defame political martyrs or revolutionaries who died for the communist cause. It can lead to a 3-year sentence. After the journalist was detained, another Chinese citizen was arrested for the same crime, this time over his Korean War comment saying, "Thanks for the egg fried rice." But how is a comment like that an offense? It could be hinting at the former communist leader Mao Zedong's son, also Mao's presumptive successor. His death supposedly involved egg fried rice. In an apocryphal story told in China, during the Korean War, U.S. soldiers discovered Mao's son when he lit a fire to cook egg fried rice. He was then killed in an airstrike. The netizen was jailed for 10 days.
The people who created this war tragedy are not criminals, but making fun of it is a crime.
Zhang says incidents like these combine two things most human civilizations value: free speech and their military history. But neither seems to have survived well in China. The U.S. is back in the United Nations Human Rights Council as an official member. That's the UN body that former President Trump quit in 2018 for protecting human rights abusers. The Biden administration made it clear from day one that they would rejoin.
Please proceed to collect the ballot papers.
The UN General Assembly on Thursday re-elected 5 members and elected 13 new members, including the U.S., to its Human Rights Council. The following 18 countries will serve on the council for 3 years, beginning January 1st, 2022.
Argentina, Benin, Cameroon, Eritrea, Finland, Gambia, Honduras, India, Kazakhstan, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Malaysia, Montenegro, Paraguay, Qatar, Somalia, United Arab Emirates, United States of America.
The council was founded in 2006, has 47 members, and is based in Geneva, Switzerland. The U.S. got the second lowest number of votes among the elected members, beating out only Eritrea. That's a country in East Africa with an authoritarian regime and a poor human rights record.
Number of votes obtained by each member state: Finland 180, Luxembourg 180, United States of America 168, Canada 1, Israel 1, Italy 1.
The Human Rights Council has been under scrutiny in recent years for having members with poor human rights records. That's one of the reasons the Trump administration pulled the U.S. out in 2018. Current members of the council include Communist China, Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, Libya, and Pakistan. Here's what then U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, said at the time.
In doing so, I want to make it crystal clear that this step is not a retreat from human rights commitments. On the contrary, we take this step because our commitment does not allow us to remain a part of a hypocritical and self-serving organization that makes a mockery of human rights.
In a statement following the election to the Human Rights Council, Secretary of State Antony Blinken thanked the UN member states for allowing the U.S. to rejoin. He says the council plays a meaningful role in protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms by documenting atrocities in order to hold wrongdoers accountable. Blinken promises to work hard to ensure the council upholds its highest aspirations. But he also notes the council suffers from serious flaws, including disproportionate attention on Israel and the membership of several states with egregious human rights records.
Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visited California over the weekend to support Hong Kong. At an event, Hong Kongers demanded freedom for the city and an end to the Chinese Communist Party. Here's NTD's Cynthia Tsai with more.
On Sunday, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and senior advisor Miles Yu spoke at an event commemorating the founding of Hong Kong Freedom Beacon. Former Hong Kong businessman turned activist Elmer Yuan founded the organization after witnessing the Chinese Communist Party's, or CCP's, oppression. 2 years ago, Yuan met with a CCP official at the height of the Hong Kong protests. During the meeting, the official asked Yuan what Hong Kong youth want.
And the highest course freedom, rule of law, and democracy. And he said, this is not real.
Yuan said that this was the moment he understood the CCP's oppression.
The entire communist leadership and normal people, because they brainwash everybody, these universal rights does not exist.
He explained that the concept of freedom does not exist under the CCP.
And I proposed to the U.S. Congress, to several congressmen, I said, these guys are criminals. For the last 70-some years, they're criminals because they don't have to follow the law.
However, the idea of freedom exists in Hong Kong due to its history as a former British colony. In 2019, widespread protests broke out across Hong Kong in response to a proposed extradition bill. This time, lawyers joined the protest alongside Hong Kong youth. The bill would have allowed Hong Kong to transfer criminal suspects to not only Taiwan, but also China to be tried for crimes. Hong Kong residents were concerned the bill would increase the CCP's control over the region. Under the CCP, China's opaque court system has a 99% conviction rate.
No, the CCP is an ideological party masquerading as a nation. They want to dominate the world. They want to change the way each and every one of you live here in the United States.
Hong Kong's leaders eventually withdrew the extradition bill, November 2019. But the speakers say the CCP's control and influence remain a threat to human rights and the universal value of freedom.
In fact, the Chinese Communist Party is not only the greatest foreign threat to America, it is the greatest threat to the 1.4 billion people still living on the mainland there.
We have a China policy with an American attitude based on American values.
Speakers encourage countries to decouple with the CCP. They say people should be aware that protecting Hong Kong's freedom means protecting the freedom of people worldwide. Cynthia Kai, NTD News, California.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.